There is more music available now than any other time in history. Streaming platforms offer users access to millions of songs. And while this is certainly a great time to be a music listener, where music accessibility is the greatest it's ever been, it brings with it a lofty challenge. From those millions of songs, how do we choose which songs to listen to? For example, Spotify, one of the world's largest music streaming platforms, offers its users access to over 40 million songs. If we assume the average song is 3 minutes in length, that's 120 million minutes of musical content, or over 228 years. Far more music than we could ever hope to listen to in our own lifetimes. And this doesn't include the over 2,000 new songs that are added to the platform every day. Now more than ever, we needed a way to effectively wade through the sea of musical options. But it's interesting to note that this isn't a new phenomenon. Back when music was distributed on physical media, like CDs, cassettes, and vinyl records, music listeners had to flip through the shelves of their local record store in order to determine what music to listen to. And it's important to note that these record stores had far more music than the average listener could listen to, so we still needed methods to determine how to listen to music. And historically, we've looked to radio DJs, record store owners, and our friends to provide opinions and recommendations about what music to listen to. And these methods of traditional music recommendation can work effectively well. But in these cases, for example, the record store owner may listen to all of the new music that they're sent to stock on the shelves, and radio DJs listen to hundreds, if not thousands, of demos sent to them by record labels and promoters. These individuals develop high-level understanding of the interconnection between different artists, styles, and genres, and they use this high-level understanding to provide useful recommendations to users. But it's important to note that these humans act as gatekeepers of musical content, and this creates a natural limitation. This limitation is useful and necessary when the content is too large for single users to understand. But a problem arises when the library of content becomes so large that these music curators are not able to get a full grasp of all of the available options. And the problem that arises is that their recommendations can become nearsighted or biased. Many things have changed with the emergence of online music streaming. Power has shifted in the music industry away from those traditional gatekeepers towards the playlist curators. And now these playlist curators hold the power in the music industry. For example, landing on a curated playlist on Spotify can make or break a new release. And for specific example, landing on a playlist like Rap Caviar with over 10 million followers can have a huge impact on the success of a song. But what's most important about this new method that we've shifted to is that these playlist curators are just as susceptible to the same deficiencies as the record store owners and the radio DJs were. They simply cannot gain an understanding of all of the musical options available on a platform like Spotify with over 40 million options. So the question is, how do we go about effectively recommending music to these listeners and connecting them with the artists they would enjoy most? The answer is intelligent algorithms. And platforms like Spotify, Pandora, and Apple Music are already investing significant resources in the development of these kinds of algorithms. And for example, Spotify offers its users access to an algorithmic playlist called Discover Weekly. Every week, Spotify generates a unique playlist for its 200 million users based on their algorithm to recommend them new songs based on their past listening history. This is a really exciting time in music recommendation because for the first time we've moved away from traditional human-based methods of music recommendation towards a system that's gained an understanding of millions of different songs and artists to provide recommendations, far beyond the scope of any single human curator. But with the introduction of these new systems, they've introduced their own problems that we as music listeners need to be cognizant of. But before we can talk about those problems, we need to understand how these systems work. So I want to go through and explain a little bit about that. So there are three main approaches to building a music recommendation system. And the first and often easiest method to implement is a popularity-based recommendation system. In these systems, we simply look at all of the content on the platform that's available. And we see which pieces of content were most viewed or most listened to by users. And then we provide that to the user in a ranked list And these can provide really useful recommendations, but the problem is they have no personalization from user to user. Every user receives the same list of most popular content. So how can we improve on this? The next step is to look at classification-based recommendation systems. Now, these systems are a little bit more advanced in that we actually use a trained model to actually predict what we believe these users will listen to and enjoy listening to. And for example, Pandora has something that they've used called the Music Genome Project, where they had trained musical listeners listen to different tracks and identify unique characteristics about those tracks, about the style and the instruments used. And after curating that database, they're able to build a model that can predict very accurately what type of music is similar to each other and what music these users would enjoy. But the problem with this approach is that it still requires humans in the mix to listen to those songs to basically tag them and give details. So it still fails to scale with the library the size of Spotify's at over 40 million tracks. So we still need another option. And that's where collaborative filtering comes in. And in collaborative filtering, we represent every user on the platform by a unique feature vector. And this is simply a mathematical way to represent the users' listening preferences and their listening history. And once we have this feature vector for each user, we can then compare users' listening preferences. And we actually can find clusters of users that share very similar listening patterns. And then in order to recommend music, we identify a single cluster of users and look at what songs a single user is listening to within that cluster that the other users in that cluster have not listened to. And we provide those songs as recommendation. And this works really effective, especially on large music collections with lots of users. And this is the method that Spotify uses in their music recommendation algorithm for Discover Weekly. So, but there's a problem here, there's a catch. We can see that there's this development of kind of a feedback loop of cyclical recommendations that can occur. Because what happens when a user begins using a service like Discover Weekly is they are provided first with recommendations. They listen to those recommendations, and those tracks then get added to their listening history since they listen to them. Then when the algorithm comes back again to provide new recommendations about the music that they should listen to, those songs that were previously recommended were in their history, and therefore it kind of continues to recommend music that was very similar to what the user was listening to before and leads to a safe listening experience where users are not pushed to enjoy or explore different genres beyond what they've already experienced. And this is really dangerous for users. And so for me, I think one of the main reasons or one of the main ways we can combat this is by providing controls to the user in the music discovery process so that they can drive it. For example, controls like randomness, uniqueness, mood, and popularity. These being controls that you would be able to change as you're going through the music discovery process. And these would help you drive the music discovery process in your own direction and break out of those algorithmic loops. Now, for example, in an effort to inject extreme randomness into my own listening, I built a web app called Sinuosity. And this web app connects with your Spotify account and builds a pseudo-random playlist for you to help you discover new music. And it features one control to the user called weirdness. And the weirdness, as you increase it, will produce playlists that contain tracks that are more random and less popular. And as you decrease the weirdness, we'll provide you with tracks that are less random and more popular. And through Sinuosity, I've discovered hundreds of new genres and styles that I would have no way of discovering through a traditional music recommendation approach. And I've explored a lot of new spaces. And this is simply just one example of user controllable parameters in the process. But as there's more and more music becomes available through streaming platforms, the demand for music discovery algorithms only continues to increase. But as users, we need to be cognizant of the limitations of these algorithms. And if we do become cognizant of them, and as they continue to improve, we will see listening diversity in music for music listeners continue to improve. Thank you.